Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about...
I'm curious about
building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about...
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
Welcome to the Curious Folks podcast for those challenging the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Effy Blue.
And I'm Jacqueline Misla, and today we're challenging the idea that talking about sex has to be hard. With the help of our guest, Jennifer Beman, we are going to explore a creative approach to talking about sex. Jennifer is a documentary filmmaker who's taken a career turn into a different kind of storytelling. Stories about sex. She's created an interactive installation, The Graphic Sex Project, to give people a way to make little stories about their sex lives, to tackle sexual shame, and to open pathways for better communication about sexual topics. This unique approach has proven to be immensely powerful, and she's currently working to make the technique available to therapists to help clients with sexual relationship issues.
That work is super important to me because obviously sex is a huge topic that I discuss with my clients, because more often than not, when people come to me and they say they want to transition into a new open relationship, if they want to become non-monogamous or whatever they're sort of saying, they want to transition towards an open setup, I ask people, why, right? What do you imagine that being in an open relationship is going to afford you? And one of the most common reasons is people talk about that they're looking for variation in their sex life, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, we've been together for X amount of years. My partner was my first partner or second partner ever, or whatever their situation is. And they are actively looking for variation, variety in their sex lives. So I go, great. Oh, what a great reason, And then I normally ask, well, what is your sex life like as it is today? And when you do a bit of digging, you realize, because initially when I started doing this, I imagined this couple has been together for a long time. Or these couples have been together for a long time, and they've tried all the things, and they've tried all the toys and all the different ways, and they're like, oh, and we're bored now. We need other people to have more fun. And then you dig a little bit and you realize, oh, you haven't even scratched the surface in exploring sex and sexuality within this relationship. And then you dig it a little further. And what I often come up with is oh, you kind of stuck in your sex life because you've been conditioned to think about it narrowly and kind of plainly and almost didactically. And so the only way that you imagine that you can have variety in your sex life is to add more people, right? Rather than being creative, being open, being experimental, being exploratory, all the things that you can be within an existing relationship.
Yeah. It's interesting because I wonder if, certainly I imagine within a long-term partnership, hopefully there's a lot of trust and security in that space. And it somehow feels safer to share some deep desires and kinks with someone who is brand new, who does not know you in your day-to-day, so that if they look at you with you want to do what? You don't have to actually then go on that OkCupid date with them, right? You can keep it moving. But your partner, you have to sit next to at dinner and after you revealed this thing. So I can understand why it could be more tentative to share certain things with partners.
Sure.
Yeah.
Exactly. Especially if there's been a status quo for such a long time. People don't want to be the one that rocks the boat. You don't want to think you don't want your partner to think that they're not good enough, or that you haven't been satisfied.
Yes.
There's so many places people go to, and you're absolutely right. Brand new person is low barrier to entry, low risk. If they come and go from your life, you don't really have that much to lose, but your 10, 20, 30-year-old partner is a huge piece of your life. And for some reason you say, going back to the last episode, I want you to call me daddy when we're having sex. And they're just whoa. It's a huge interruption, huge disruption.
Yeah, particularly because we're talking about stories and, you often talk about like how we need to interrupt the stories in our minds. And Jennifer noted this in the conversation that studies have shown that if you interview each side of a monogamous partnership and ask them about what they do in their sex lives, they share a description of what they think their partner wants that then they fulfill for that person. Yes. But when they ask the opposite person, that's actually not what they want, right? Exactly. So we have these narratives in our minds saying, okay, my partner wants this and this. They don't want kink. They like it vanilla, or they like it this way, or they want me to turn around. And so I'm going to keep doing that. And then you get stuck in that pattern. And let's assume maybe at some point they did. But now it's like 8 years later. And like that position is no longer fun and new. Right, but there's not a refreshing of the dialogue and saying, oh, what do you want now? Or I saw this thing, or I heard about this thing, and I want to try it.
Exactly. So I think at the core of it all, we can't have exciting, creative, fun sex if we can't talk about sex in an exciting, fun, creative way, right?
Yeah.
So, and Jennifer's project is exactly trying to fix this, right? She's trying to provide this a way that you can talk about sex and make it fun, make it accessible, make it less scary. And, she talks about her methodology, and I think it's smart. I think it's really, really smart. I think it's reduces it down to something really simple so that you can impose on it what your ideas are, your thoughts are. And I think it's smart. It's a smart way to go about it, for sure.
As we were talking, you and I prepping for this conversation, we were talking about why it feels difficult. And I was saying, it's hard to talk about sex. We need things like this because it's hard. And you're like, but is it? And I was like, it is. But you're like, but is it? I was like, it is. And you helped me come to the idea of what we're trying to challenge today, that it has to be hard. Just because it is hard does not mean that it needs to be hard. And that was something
inherently hard.
Right.
Yes. Yes, exactly. It's not inherently hard. It's not like we are born into thinking like sex is hard, talking about sex is hard. It's an entirely social conditioning situation, right?
Yeah.
And so we continue to perpetuate this idea that talking about sex is hard, and the more we say that, the more
it becomes hard.
It becomes hard. So I maintain that talking about sex isn't inherently hard, but we make it so.
Yeah. I mean, let me say, there are lots of feelings wrapped up in the conversation, right? You can feel shame or fear or feel inexperienced or feel defensive. So there is navigating through those feelings in the conversation. And I do recognize that when things have to do with sexuality, that it becomes harder even to navigate through those things, right? So we have difficult conversations with our partners about things potentially like money or like parenting or chores or things like that. And we navigate through those emotions and do that, but somehow sex feels more difficult. And it was making me think about, I could be home with my daughter, it could be just her and I, and maybe she has a pain or, something, let's say in her butt. She's like, oh, the side of my butt hurts, right? And so she'll come up to me and say, the side of my butt hurts. Like she'll whisper it to me. And I'll say, why are you whispering? Because, number one, there's no one here. But number two, if her elbow hurt, if her knee hurt, she would just run in and be like, my elbow hurts. Why? Because it's like our private parts. Is there now this more, further level of discretion? Particularly again in my house, like I'll shout vulvas from like the rooftop. So like, I don't know why we're like whispering about butts, but there is, to your point, there is messaging that exists even in a household where I'm trying to dismantle that. Outside, she is hearing, you don't talk about that. You say it in whispered tones. These aren't things that we share out loud. And that's a lot of narrative to try to break through in order to tell our sexual story.
Mm-hmm. And it starts so young, you see it firsthand. And it's things like social media or even influencers. It's just like so much stuff is out there. So you can, I don't know, your house isn't a naked house, right? I don't.
It is a naked house.
You see, even she lives in a naked house.
I know. No, she does not want to be naked. And I don't walk around naked. But if I'm coming out of the shower and she needs me or something, I'm going to be naked. But yes, she is starting to get, and this is age appropriate. She'll start to get to the age now where she wants me to turn around while she's changing. Totally age appropriate. And I'm interested to see as she gets older, how it evolves and how much impact what's happening outside, because that certainly was the case for me. I mean, I now, on the weekly basis, talk about sex and sexuality. That was not the case for me for a long time. I would be concerned, ashamed, honestly, thinking that I was too much, thinking that it was too sensitive, thinking that I was going to shock the other person. I mean, you've talked about this. You said that you have startled and shocked your fair share of partners.
Yes, no, exactly. I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I have a great relationship with my vulva, and I feel comfortable. Like I never got the memo that I should be ashamed of sex. I was moving around and, they got the wrong address, so I never got the memo. So I'm happy talking about sex. I think that comfort level in which I can talk about sex and I choose to talk about sex in certain situations startles the other person. I've definitely had that experience. I've had the experience where people feel liberated and encouraged and empowered and inspired and all the beautiful things. And that's why we do this work here right now. Yeah. And I've had maybe not equal amount, but like significant amount of people just be like, whoa, like too much, what's going on? And it's like it put people off. I've had someone tell me that I was too earnest. Which I'm like, okay, have we met? so like a bunch of things. I think that really is just for me. I'm like, I'm not the problem, but to me, it reinforces that the social norms are that we don't talk about sex and we whisper and we, if you're a woman, you're supposed to be coy about it and. Like we don't know our words and there's like so many reasons why sex is hard to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you say that about being coy. I think that's completely true. I've had many a situation where I think I'm putting out all like the breadcrumbs of clues. And I'm like, doing the wink, like showing some shoulder, like, hello. And then at the end of the night, it doesn't happen. I'm super disappointed. It probably comes up in conversation maybe the next day if I'm in a bad mood. And then my partner would be like, oh, I totally would have. I didn't know that's what you wanted. And I'm like, what? All the clues and signs. What? And she's like, you're going to just need to say it out loud. Because all those things that you think that you're doing, I don't see it. You just need to say it. Yeah. And so we actually, in terms of creative conversation and creative dialogue around sex, I've talked about this before, we have code words. And so, because sometimes it can feel uncomfortable to say, I would like to have sex. And so instead, if we are feeling frisky, we say that we are in a cozy mood. And if we are just feeling like sweet and loving and cuddly, then we say we're feeling cuddly. So there'll be times where, a hug will turn into a kiss. Maybe my kiss is a little more sexy than her kiss. And she'll say, I'm in a cuddly space right now. And I'll say, okay. Let me know if cuddly turns to cozy because I'm open. I'm open to that evolution. Right. And so, but it feels like a much easier way to let someone know where you're at without it feeling like you're shutting somebody down. And so that little language tweak has helped us a lot.
Absolutely. And I think, honestly, I do believe sometimes it's just about vocabulary. It's just finding your stride. Yeah. Like we come across this with consent, right? A lot of the reasons why people struggle with consent isn't the idea of consent. It's just that we don't know how to navigate it in words or in, even like at the ninja level, at touch level, right? Yeah. We don't have the comfort with articulating where we're at and like breaking it down and really like navigate the topic, right?
Yes.
So when you say something like, can I touch you? Yeah, like that does sound clumsy and unsexy.
Yes. This is true with my partnership right now. This has been the first time where I've had consent. I mean, we've been together almost 3 years, and in every exchange, she'll continue to say, "Is this okay? Is this okay?" But it doesn't sound like, "Can I touch you here? Can I touch you?" Like as things are happening, she's like, "Is this okay? And what about this? Is this okay? Is that all right?" And I'm like, yeah. Or then there might be a moment where I'm like, no, not there, not now. But you can keep trying something else. But just the way that she's saying it feels so comforting and like appreciative, right? Like I can get like, hey, you're asking me, that's great, and it still feels sexy.
Right. Exactly. And that's what, and it takes practice. It takes like, try this, try that, try it from your point of view, try it from the other person's point of view. So sometimes like one of the suggestions I give people, especially around consent, is instead of asking somebody if you want to touch them, you can invite somebody to touch you and give them instructions, right? You can say, would you like to stroke the back of my arm, or would you like to give me a massage? Or would you like, so you can like flip it around, and it just takes practice, and it takes finding the courage, being curious, and being creative, all the C's. Be willing to navigate your way around this topic and try things out. Same with sex. So one of the tools that I use in my practice and in myself also, there's the very famous yes, no, maybe list, right? So if you don't know what it is, you can Google it. It's all over the place. It's also, you can find it on my website as well, but it's a very common list. It's an extensive list of all the sex acts. First of all, please note that it runs to like 3 pages. Just like FYI, people, there's a lot to sex.
Use that for inspiration.
Yeah, exactly. So, and please let it expand your mind and understanding of sex. So that's one note. And the other is it's just like extensive note of all the things you can do. And the standard version of this, it says yes, no, maybe. And the idea is that you go anal. Yes, I want to do it. No, I don't want to do it. Maybe I'll look into it, right? So that's kind of the way you do it. So I think it's a really great list, and I think it's a really great way to do this. However, the part that I struggle with it is that it takes away from this curiosity and the creativity and the courage piece, right? Everybody can go down a list and check yes, no, maybe. It's easy, but it's not really it's gonna inform you. It's unlikely to inspire you, right? And that's where I'm like, okay, here's what I'd like to do. So I take that list and I offer it to my clients, and sometimes I do it myself, is I go knowledge, experience, desire, right? So now you can have open conversations, right? You can say anal, knowledge. How much do I know about anal? Maybe it's like a penis penetrating an anus, right? That could be the extent of your knowledge. However, there is like so much more to it then, right? There's how to do it safely, how to do it with pleasure.
How to do it without a penis.
How to do it without a penis, exactly. So all these things, then you're like, okay, well then you can like talk about it, what I know, what you know, what is there to know. So it really creates an open dialogue. So I think once you sort of allow more space and look at it more in an open-ended way, then that list becomes not just information, but inspiration.
Yeah, and a conversation.
Right? And a conversation. Yeah. Exactly. So that's the way that I find it really helps within my practice.
Yeah, all of that, what you're saying, honestly became more revealed to me when I was doing the Graphic Sex Project workshop. So a few years ago, when we were still hosting events in Brooklyn basements, we hosted a Graphic Sex Project workshop with Jennifer Beman, and I loved it. It felt like Tetris meets art meets Excel, right? Which, I mean, that sounds amazing. And it was a very non-scary approach to thinking about documenting and then talking about sexual desire. And it was super interesting and fun. And one of the things that I learned in that process is the thing that I am more drawn to, or more excited about, I should say, is the build up to the orgasm. And so if you look at my chart, it's like, we're going to do this and this and this, and I'm going to get close, and then we're going to stop and go down, and we're going to do this and this and this and this, and then we're going to get close, and then we're going to stop and go down. And I don't think that I would have been able to articulate that before without going through that practice and saying, okay, what do I know about this? Like you said, what's been my experience and what's my desire? What do I want to try now? And so it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And I think actually Jennifer will do a much better job of explaining it than I can. So we hope that you enjoy the interview. So Jennifer, I am excited because I had the pleasure of being in the workshop with you. Effy only missed one workshop in the years and years that we have done workshop, and she keeps talking about it. She's not like, literally, she's like, I can't believe that I missed that workshop. Like, often she has reflected on, because I come back with my charts and my graphs, and I'm like, look what I did, Effy, and she's been so bummed.
I remember yours too. It was beautiful.
I know. I was
I'm an overachiever in all ways.
Always.
But I think I loved it because I do struggle, even though I talk weekly on a podcast about sex. I do struggle with talking about sex in my relationship, particularly because I feel like because of my history, I feel like I've asked for too much, or I am too sexual, or I want too much. And so there's like that too something is in my head. And then I feel bad about if they say no, I'm going to feel weird. I'm going to feel sad. How do I even say it? How do I say it without, making them feel bad? There's just so much noise running in my head. And so I imagine that it is that noise that brought you to this work. And so I'm hoping that we can start there, which is, how did the idea for the graphic sex project emerge for you?
Yeah, it was quite a little journey, and it was. I think everybody does really struggle with talking about sex. I do this installation and this work with the graphic sex project, and sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I'm such an imposter because I have things I'm afraid to talk to my partner about. So it's hard for everyone. I don't know why it's hard for everyone. It's because the culture has created these barriers around it, because we all feel shame, because we all grew up with shame, because our parents gave us shame, and we feel embarrassed. We feel like we're to this or to that, which implies that there's some right. I mean, if you're too much, then there's some much that's the exact right amount of much, and we all know that that's bullshit. So there's no to anything, but still we all kind of feel that way, like that or many people do. And for me, the journey, I would have to say, started when my husband and I opened up our marriage and started exploring different ways of being non-monogamous, and we've found that the best part was talking about sex really intimately with people we just met. Like we just, sit down to dinner with a couple that we're thinking about having sex with and talk about our sex lives. And it was great. It was like even better than the sex. I was just so amazed by that and wanted to share it with people. I wanted to figure out, but all the people that were in my life at that time were, didn't want to talk about sex either. Nobody wants to talk about sex, especially in my community of mostly 30-year-old married people. 30-year-old married people do not want to talk about sex. And so nobody was, because there's just so much baggage, in a 30-year relationship. There's a lot to unpack there. And nobody wants to betray their partner, and nobody wants to say, I'm having trouble with this, and expose their partner or something, so it's there's this kind of shut down thing around it. So I wanted to work on that. And at the time, my husband was starting a alternative art space called Rhizome in DC. A little plug for Rhizome, my husband's art venture. And I said, I want to do sex talks there at this space. So I started this group called Women Uncorked, which was just for women to get together and talk about sex. And it was usually 15 to 30 people would show up, and it was very conversational. It's as soon as you give people permission and say it's okay, they are ready. They are there at the gates, ready to start talking about sex. And so, people were saying we were just, bunch of strangers, and we were talking about orgasms and our feelings about our orgasms, good and bad, and how do you squirt. It was almost every meeting, somebody brought up squirting. Every meeting, somebody brought up how do I be multiple orgasms?
I have strong feelings about that.
I have
almost every meeting, somebody said, I'm worried because I can't orgasm from intercourse. Oh my God. So, I saw a real need there. And I homeschooled my kids, random fact. And we have these Mequon, which they're 1 centimeter cubes that you teach kids math concepts. And I was thinking about how in my own sex life that it seemed like there were different scenarios that my husband and I would play out. that, I mean, not like escape convict and the warden's wife kind of scenarios, just, there were typical ways that things happened, sometimes we just had oral sex. Sometimes he had oral sex on me, and then we'd have intercourse, and then I'd give him a blowjob to finish him off. It was like there were different things happened. And some of them I liked better than others. And some of them he liked better than others. And I was kind of thinking about this, like how the order of events and the proportion of events changes my experience of it. And so I started playing around with these meat clowns because they were sitting right there. And I was like if the red one was kissing, I'd like that. And I was like building this. I thought, oh, this is cool. I'll take this to my Women Uncorked group, and we'll all make a graph of a good sexual experience, and that'll be fun. And it was super fun. Everybody loved it. And what I found is that people would have these like really amazing insights about what they want. I mean, I could see it in some women would be like, this is all women, by the way, Women Uncorked. They would have this moment where they'd be like, oh, what do I like? Oh, wait a minute, here's what I like and what do I actually do? Just, it would sort of open their minds because it's such a different way of thinking about it. It's like a different cognitive function, when you start thinking about it in terms of cubes. And then the conversation that came out of that was so great. Like people would look at each other's graphs and talk about them and ask questions about them. And, it would really, so I said, this is awesome. I'm going to do this as an installation. In DC, there's this regular thing called Artomatic, which is a big non-juried art show that lasts for like 6 weeks. And I said, I'll put this at Artomatic and people can make graphs and I'll hang them on the walls. And I did that and it was super fun and super successful. I got hundreds of people made graphs, and hundreds of people went through the room and just looked at all the graphs, and they'd stand in the room and they'd, look at a particular graph and then talk about it with their partner about, well, this person, like, I never thought of doing it that way, And then it just grew from there. It's like I just kept doing the installations because I saw that they were just really effective in helping people to talk about a really tough subject.
Sure. I found, even though I missed the workshop, I found when I was earlier on today, I was explaining to the person who's helping us with our videos that we're talking to you and what you do, just like while we're having banter. And I was teasing him a little bit, and I said, so this person's project is called Graphic Sex Project. And what do you imagine? So when I said, I'm going to show you their Instagram. What do you imagine this project is like? Just like, give me some, whatever comes to mind. And of course, his mind went to the obvious places, and he's like, it's going to be really explicit. It's going to be really like challenging. And I was like, so this is what it is. And I show you the Instagram page you have, which is the absolute opposite of what he was expecting, obviously. It was like the opposite of explicit. And then as I was explaining to him what this was all about, the two things that came up that really resonated with me as I was explaining this to him is, one, I think the explicit piece, when you are actually talking about it with the explicit, especially with imagery, I think it triggers the shame piece, and it triggers like embarrassment and the hardship around the topic. I think when you flatten it down to cubes, which are the opposite of explicit, right? Yes. Exactly. It kind of unblocks, it kind of it sidesteps the shame that is automatically triggered when you see like explicit images.
Yeah.
And the other piece is, because ultimately you have a graph, there's an opportunity to narrate the graph, right? There's an opportunity to say, I made this graph because these things represent this leads into this leads into this, which is another way I found to, again, sidestep the shame. Like, you're not really talking about what I want, what I need, but you're narrating a graph, which kind of also tricks your brain into thinking, oh, I'm just narrating some cubes, not talking about sex.
That is so exactly it. Yeah, the cubes kind of, the way I put it, which is you said it better, mine's kind of nerdier, it desexualizes sex. It takes it into this other realm, so you can think about it kind of without shame. So I really think of these as like little stories. It's a little story you're telling in a really visual way. And I think that telling a story about our sex life is not something people usually do. We don't think about sex that way. We don't think about it as a narrative thing. We don't tell the story of our sex life, I think. I mean, I don't know. I'm no psychologist, but anyway, it's just not way that we think about it. And so when you create a story, it changes the way you experience it. Like, I think people, you can take, I'm an editor, I edit documentaries. So I know this really in a visceral way. You can take the same elements and you can tell really completely different stories with them. And I think, sometimes I think people just need to tell better stories about their life. Their life is fine. They just need to tell a better story about it. So anyway, that's a digression. But I think you look at these graphs that people make, and it is a story. And one of the things that I think is really powerful, if two people are like a couple or throuple or whatever are making a graph of their experience, to tell each other the story of their graph. So like your partner takes your graph and then tells you back your story that you're showing. So I think it's like an opportunity for that person to feel really heard, that you're, and, with the person who's telling the story, it's kind of like reflecting in psychology, that it's a really powerful way of talking to people is to when you're talking about hard subjects, is to just say what you're hearing, back to them. And that's what the graphs gives you an opportunity to do, is to tell your partner's story. Oh, okay, I see that you have a lot of the red cubes, and that stands for being submissive, and it seems to be going throughout the graph. And I see it's layered on top of you can describe their graph to them with no judgment on you, or no judgment on them or anything. Just, here's the story you're telling. And it really, I think it opens up a way of talking about it that I think can be really, really powerful.
Yeah. Can you go into the instructions a little bit? So, because I want folks to be able to visualize it who haven't seen this before. And we're going to post, we will post not only some images, we will post my graph on our Instagram. So speak about being vulnerable. Everyone as Adele said, go easy on me. But I'm interested. So if folks are picturing it and everyone could go on to Graphic Sex Project and create your own, but let's assume you happen to have a bunch of little 1-inch blocks hanging out in your house. Yeah. Walk folks through what the exercise looks like.
You really can use anything, and it is the same. Most people don't have 1 centimeter colored cubes hanging around their house, but buttons.
Yes.
Macaroni shapes.
Yes.
Anything that comes in several variations of around the same size. Pieces of construction paper cut into squares. And so then what people do is they take all these objects and they make a legend. They're basically assigning values to, what do these things stand for? What does, what does an elbow macaroni shape stand for? What does the green button mean? And you're thinking, actually, let me back up, because really the first thing that you have to do is think of what story you want to tell. Like I was saying, these are like little stories. So what story you're going to tell? Is this how sex typically happens for you, a fantasy, what your favorite sexual flow, your favorite sexual script, what your partner's favorite sexual script is. It really can be so many things. A lot of people make a graph of like a particular sexual experience. Here's what happens. But then other people make graphs of what I want from sex. Things that make me feel sexy, my relationship to my body, how it's changed, my sex life over my entire lifespan, the types of partners I had, your feelings throughout what you're thinking during a sexual experience, a good self-care day. I mean, there's like, obviously it's limitless what you can make a graph about. So you have to think first, what is the story that you're going to tell? So you come up with a story. Let's say you want to tell the story of, a threesome. I've got lots of graphs people have made of a good threesome. Then you assign pick out the colors, and you're assigning, what each cube stands for. It stands for kissing. It stands for blowjobs. It stands for feeling nervous. It stands for, there's one graph that somebody made that I love that is things that make sex better for me. So it's a sexual experience, but it's now my partner is telling me how beautiful I am. Now my partner is making me feel, is dominating me. It's like, so you're deciding what each of these cubes stand for. Oh, and then once you've kind of got your legend, then you make a graph of it. What is more cubes going to mean for one thing. What order are they going to go in? For some people, the cubes mean intensity, or often they mean just a proportion, like a time proportion. So like you use more cubes to mean, more of the yellow cubes that mean cuddling than the more, what are the proportions? And that's one thing that I was really interested in when I started was how would people proportion out the sexual activity? Like for heterosexuals, how important is penis and vagina intercourse? What proportion would that show up in the graphs? So the cubes either mean proportion, or they mean intensity, or they mean number of events, or and you can layer them if some people layer them to show that things are happening concurrently. Some people it's completely inexplicable what they're trying to communicate, and that's that's okay too.
Folks have been really creative with it. I remember in the workshop that we had, some folks were like 3D and were like building it up. Some folks were building out. So yeah, a lot of different ways to approach it.
Yeah, you're making once you've separated it from the words, and now you're using these colors. You're making aesthetic choices. You're making proportion, mathematical kind of choices. You're letting your creativity flow, which it's a good thing to be connected with sex. I think is creativity. Sex is a creative act. Not in the sense of procreation, but creative play, creative interaction. So I think that bringing that sense of creativity to sex is really valuable.
The other piece, I think, exactly what you're saying, Jennifer, around both having a story to tell, and then looking at things like, I'm interested in how much like penis and vagina, shows up. I think it's also the way that you're suggesting that we think about sex and illustrate it by using these blogs. I think you're also allowing people to expand what they mean when they say sex, because so often when we say sex, it's very reduced down to, hard penis and a wet vagina, wham bam, male orgasm, done, right? That's most people think about sex. And an ideal, as people tackle their non-monogamy in my sessions, it's one of those things like, okay, I normally ask people things like, well, where does sexting stay, right? Is sexting cheating? Where are your boundaries, right? And the idea is not to catch people out, but to get them to expand their idea of sex and realize that it is a story, that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and various, beats, if you will, and that it's not just like one activity. And I think by allocating shapes and proportions and quantities and relations to one another and putting it into a graph, very almost simplifying it, but by simplifying it, I think you expand the idea much bigger, which I think then itself is kind of an interesting, because you're reducing it down to something very, very simple. Yeah. Yet by doing that, you're expanding the idea.
Yes. Yeah. I have so much to say about that. I don't know where to start. Yes, people. You don't know what somebody means when they say you want to have sex. They mean those studies they've done where they say there was one very recently where they asked people, it's mostly college students, they were asking, would you say you had sex if you gave somebody a blowjob? Would you say you had sex if you manually stimulated each other but nobody came? And it's kind of astounding to me how many people don't count those things as sex. Right. That it's not sex unless, at least for heterosexuals, it's not sex unless you put a penis in a vagina. And of course, for non-heterosexuals, that does never happen. So I think that trickles down. That sort of permeates our whole culture. Is that sense that there's sex? I mean, even we call it foreplay before what? does this foreplay, have to be before something? And it's before, so it really, the priority on penis and vagina intercourse among heterosexuals is kind of crazy. But you also don't know, there was one study that I thought was super interesting where they asked, this also is all heterosexuals, which is another problem of, science. Almost all of our sex research is based on heterosexual 20-year-olds, because it's all college students too. So, that's a problem. But anyway, this one study asked heterosexual couples, what's your ideal length of intercourse? And what do you think your partner's ideal length of intercourse is? And people were terrible at knowing what their partner's assumed preference is, and that they tended to have sex based on what they were each assuming about what the other wanted. And I thought this was so interesting. And so this is what my graphic sex project is all about, is helping people understand. Now, actually, I really do like penis and vagina, but I really only want it to be 10%, or I want it to be 40%, and people just really were not understanding that what people want, and that then basing their actions, their enacted sexual script, on what they thought, which was based on stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly because I think that to your point around many studies are of college students, I think that if you asked me in high school what sex was, it would be a very different definition of what sex is than right now, right? At that point, I was really trying to toe the line. I was trying to create some hard definitions so that everything else I was doing would not count as sex. Right now, if there's some play of any form, I'm like, that was great sex, right? There's been an
now you do a sex podcast.
Yes,
exactly. Now I do. Right. Exactly. But I think that makes sense. I think that if that is what we are hearing out in the world, and that's being reflected back at us, and it's really from such a small subset of folks that we're actually hearing that this is the status quo, that creates a deep amount of shame, that creates fear, that creates all the things that makes talking about it difficult. And I know one of the things that you had been mentioning is that not only is it difficult to talk about within partnerships, it's difficult to talk about even with therapists. And so you shared that that's kind of where your work is evolving. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that is. So therapists have a hard time talking about sex, even though it's often, a very major part of a couple's relationship. I mean, obviously it's a big centerpiece to a relationship. So it really needs to be talked about, I think, in couples therapy, but therapists have a hard time. So we're with the pandemic and stuff, I stopped doing installations, and I don't know if I'll do installations again, because I've really gone into a different direction, which is to develop this as something that therapists can use in sessions with clients, just because I've seen the quality of insights that people get thinking about their sex life in this way, and not just their sex life, but their relationships, it's really a way to think about your values. Each cube is something you value, and then you're ranking your values. Mm-hmm. And understanding our values is, I think, a really important part of our mental health. What do we actually care about, and how am I enacting that in my life? I really want sex for connection. Am I doing the things during my sexual that bring me connection? I really want to feel my body. Am I doing those things that make me feel my body? And sometimes the things you value, you have the most, anxiety around. It's really important to you. So, you're not, maybe you're shy about asking for it. Because it's so important to you, and you end up having these experiences where you're not getting what you value out of it. Anyway, I went off on a tangent. What I meant to say is that I think the cubes are about thinking about your values, and I think that's something that can be really, really useful in therapy. To talk about sex, yes, because it really opens up the doors to that conversation when people have trouble talking about sex. But you can also make a graph of your relationship, or how you divide the housework, or how you're dealing with your kids, or what kind of parent do I want to be? What kind of experiences do I want with my kid that makes me feel powerful as a parent? Make a graph of that. What makes me feel professionally enriched? Am I doing the things that make me feel professionally enriched? Make a graph about them. What are they? What's the order of them? What's the proportion of them? So I think that this is going to be a really valuable tool for therapists and coaches and sex coaches and couples therapists. It's just going to be all the tools you need to give to your client. They can also go online, make a graph online, and then share that with you in therapy, and just to be like a visual aid, for talking about an issue.
Yeah, and I can definitely imagine myself using it for myself, even though I didn't make it to the workshop. And also with my clients. And I think the other piece that's, again, coming up for me is the thing that I would find super interesting is that if there was any way that this is turned enough of a sort of a research piece, that I'd be interested in seeing brain scans of people as they talk about sex, just straight up with no props, versus if they were talking about sex using the Graphic Sex Project as they're narrating the graph. Because
my God, that would be so cool.
My hypothesis would be that potentially different parts of the brain will light up, are activated when you're doing it like straight off versus narrating a graph. And I think I can imagine that my hypothesis would be that this would be obvious with sex, and I think similarly with other topics as well. So I think the more tender the topic, the more of the variation between doing it without props or with the Graphic Sex Project props would be my hypothesis on it.
Yeah. Oh my God. That sounds like a great study.
Right? If there was only an fMRI machine just lying around and that we can just put people into, I would sign up for that. If there was like a fMRI machine you could sign up for to do research,
I know.
Line me up.
There's a few things I'd like to use an fMRI machine for, actually.
Even I think things like, I don't know if you ever want to try this one day, even if you were doing things like taking blood pressure and pulse to see if there was anxiety, like what the anxiety level is up.
Absolutely.
Where the anxiety level is when you're doing it without props versus when you're talking about the same thing through the Graphic Sex Project methodology. If there was a difference, like a physiological difference between like anxiety levels and tension and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, that is so cool. I would love to do all of those studies. So over the pandemic, I started doing a study based on the Graphic Sex Project. I took all the graphs. I did this in a partnership with a UCLA researcher, Amanda Fries, and we took all of the graphs and we coded them and then crunched the numbers to see what kind of we could learn from how people made these graphs.
Tell us.
That was amazing. Well, one thing was, it was a hell of a lot of work. I could not believe how much time it took. It was like, I spent so many hundreds of hours. It's going to be, it was accepted by the Journal of Positive Sexuality and is coming out in their next edition. I'm really, really excited about that.
That's fantastic.
So, yeah, a lot of things. Well, one of the things that was really, really interesting to me is, like I said earlier, that I was really interested in how the differences between how heterosexual people value penis and vagina intercourse in relation to all the other parts. And, this is my own, I guess, cultural bias and stereotype and assumptions. I assumed that men would value intercourse more than women. And I did not find that to be true. They used proportionally around the same number of cubes to represent intercourse. Men and women, heterosexual men and women. So that was really interesting. The one that was different was kissing and cuddling, which was valued more by women than by men, not just heterosexual, but other orientations as well. So that was interesting.
I have a question. Do you have insight into the... is there a difference between the detail of the story between the genders? So, like, my hypothesis would be... okay, tell me.
What's your hypothesis?
My hypothesis would be that, obviously, like, owning my biases, my hypothesis would be that women have a more detailed narration to their story, whereas men will have... their graph would be more straightforward and less intricate, would be my hypothesis.
That is exactly true. Yes, women used more cubes, significantly more cubes than men, and had more legend items, the cubes that they labeled. And And so I correlated that with that famous study that came out in 2017 about the frequency of orgasm during sex and comparing heterosexual men orgasmed in like 98% of sexual encounters, and women like 65, the so-called orgasm gap.
Yeah,
Orgasm gap. And what the author's main conclusion was that women will orgasm more if there's a more variety of activity in a sexual encounter.
Right. It's not that we don't like sex. It's we don't want to be bored. That's actually what studies. If it is repetitive, we will lose interest.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is interesting, right? Because the common assumption is that men are into variation because we imagine men to go for multiple partners, and that's where. And the reason is because they have more tendency towards variation. That's the narrative. The common narrative is like, oh, men like variety, a woman likes stability. You're like, is that though? You're just like slicing it differently. Men like variety and they go about variety through seeking different partners. Women are like, well, we can just keep the same partner and do different things, which kind of is easier. And you can have like more fun with the same person rather than constantly be out there looking for someone. So I think, and again, we're talking about it in the binary, and it's not, it's just because that's how society is reflected. I think everybody likes variety. I think humans in general like variety. It's just that we fulfill that need for variety in different ways.
Let me also know, I think that why this work is also important is, and Effy and I have this debate and we talk about it with different scientists who come on about nature versus nurture. And in one of the more recent conversations, realizing that there aren't verses, that our nature adapts to whatever the nurture and the environment is. And that becomes actually our new nature. And so understanding that biologically in our DNA, there may not be this difference between those who identify as male and those who identify as female. And yet it exists in that way because there are narratives that society has played out that has suppressed women's sexuality in relationships, in the movies, out into the world, and not men. And so now there are these narratives that have kept the storytelling about sexuality in our own minds as women, as opposed to in our lives. And so just wanting to note that, because I think that this work is important, because I believe that if we then can change those narratives, then our reality and that data will eventually change. Like, we can lead to a world where there is a smaller orgasm gap. If we could do better jobs of telling stories about what we want and busting the myths between what folks believe that the genders want.
Yes. You can't make assumptions on what people want and what people need based on cultural stereotypes. One of the things I think is really interesting when you look at all the graphs is that the graphs seem to me to be detached somewhat from stereotypes about what men want, what women want, what gay people want. You might see a graph made by a 20-year-old gay man that looks strikingly similar to this graph by a 55-year-old heterosexual woman, so they transcend those stereotypes. We are all so individual, and so there's so much variety in what each of us have our own unique thing that we want about sex, or what makes sex right for us, and it's more than our whatever bucket we put ourselves in.
So you now have been talking about sex for a few years, I imagine, both privately and publicly. And so we want to ask you 4 rapid fire questions that will help us see kind of some of the learnings that you've had over the course of this work. I'm interested specifically in this first one, which is a piece of advice that you would give to your younger self about love, sex, and relationships, knowing what you know now.
I have a piece of advice. And my piece of advice is that being weird is the point. Like, bring your weirdness, because there's, I think I spent a lot of time as a younger person going, oh, I'm weird. Don't say that. That's too weird. And I find when I say those things, people want to hear the weird stuff. People want to hear it. they might react and go, whoa, that's weird. But they want to hear it, and it adds to the world. I think that each of all the weirdness we can bring to the world is what the world's looking for.
I love it. Embrace the weird. I love it. Embrace the weird. Make a t-shirt. Embrace the weird.
This will be for the cutout parts, but that is my insight from doing a lot of mushrooms and LSD in my later years.
We're doing a episode. Our next episode conversation is going to be with someone about psychedelics and sexuality, and so yeah.
So our next question, what is one romantic or sexual adventure on your bucket list?
Well, I don't know if it's exactly a bucket list. It's just sort of next in line. But there is kind of a person that I have a little crush on that I'm working on.
Now like, so let's go.
I know. Oh, the crush phase is so good. Love the crush phase.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, question number 3. How do you challenge the status quo?
I don't know.
By existing, the work that you're doing, for having
by being weird, by embracing your weird,
being weird, and talking about the things that I continue to work on that myself. As you know, I still have I still have moments when it's hard for me to talk about sex, and so and I'm keeping working on that myself, and I'm going to keep working on it in other people too.
Yeah, keep doing it. It's such a good project, and it has such a good mission, and it's
Thank you.
Yeah, keep doing it. That is how you challenge the status quo. Absolutely. So we're all curious folks here, and we're curious. What are you curious about lately?
I have to say that I'm afraid it's a little boring what I'm curious about lately, but it's mostly like, how do I run a fucking business? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm like trying to be an entrepreneur and trying to figure out how to do a Indiegogo campaign. I don't know, man.
Yes. When you start this work, you don't realize you're going to be CFO, COO, CMO.
So many skills are not in my skill set. So if anyone would like to help me.
Yes. Call to action, folks who want to get involved. Yeah.
But I'm really curious about the studies that you mentioned, Effy. I so am curious about putting somebody in a fMRI and having them make a graph. That is amazing.
Yes, I volunteer. I volunteer for that.
Yeah, no. I think there'll be a line around the corner. If you, with the person that you did this study with at UCLA, maybe just like reach out to them, see if they have a fMRI machine lying around that you can put people into. But I think it would be super interesting because as I said, I think my hypothesis is that there'll be different parts of the brain lighting up.
Yeah.
So exciting.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. This was so fun and really gave a big lift to my day. So I love talking to you. And it was great to talk to you. I wish I was in New York so I could be friends with you.
That was great. It was so great to see her again and catch up on the project.
Yeah, that was fun.
That was fun. And, I think we can all, put sex on the table as a topic. I think the three of us could talk forever.
Yes. My mind, I was like, put sex on the table, have sex on the table, just
sex and tables. We should do an episode on sex and tables.
I loved it. I think one of the things that occurred to me too after we spoke with her is I think this is actually a really helpful tool for folks who are asexual or aromantic because it helps separate out intercourse and what we are defining as sex with sensuality and sexuality and really helps give us more language and opportunity for dialogue around what makes us feel good and feel connected. And so I love this as a tool for folks of all types to be able to think about and know themselves and then be able to have the language and the tools to share with somebody else. So I thought that was fantastic. I think I need to revisit my graph. I did it probably like 3 years ago. I want to see if it is still true. I'm going to ask my partner to go to the website and create one so that we can have like a like a gallery storytelling night. Mm-hmm.
I love it. I love it. And by the way, we'll be publishing Jacqueline's graph on our social media.
That's right.
I should do one.
Yes.
I think I am definitely going to do mine because I keep coming back to these things, right? Curiosity, creativity, and courage are the key that unlocks all the doors that are sealed shut by shame and fear. Like it's really simple as that. When we do all these episodes, we talk to all these people doing amazing work, and I find like we come to this conclusion. And my big takeaway from this is, Jennifer looked at sex, and she was like, "It's hard for me. How can I hack it?" And she was curious, and she's a creative person, and she had the ovaries to do it and then share it for people. So I think that's kind of what this is about. So curiosity, creativity, courage, friends. Like that's me, cultivate those things, and sex is so much more fun. Is what I would say. And the other piece was that I found that how simplifying something that is otherwise complex can really help you expand your mind and wrap your head around the complexity of it, if that makes sense to me. So we talked about it extensively. She took something complicated like sex and our feelings about sex and our desires and all those things, and she intentionally reduced them down to colored 1 centimeter cubes, whatever the American measurement of it is, like, these cubes, and she put them on a very, very basic XY axis, and she's like, go for it, and then it's such a simple way of looking at it, but it really expands the mind into thinking to all the nooks and crannies and the details and the nuances of one's sexuality. And I thought it's just smart, it's just a really fun, creative, smart way to go about it.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because it's making me think, what are the other ways that we can go back to the basics, if you will, make things easier, less complicated, and make things more fun? How can we have some conversations over brownies? How can we paint and draw as we're talking? Like, how do we activate other parts of our brains so that a situation doesn't feel so tense and serious? Yeah,
exactly. Like add color, you and your famous flip chart. When we were working together, you would show up to sessions with these, like, not only notes, but like notes in Technicolor, like
there were drawings, yes, it's true,
highlights, and like, and it's funny, and it's smart, because I think the areas of our brain that can get so stifled because of the shame and the stigma and all the social norming, I think when you throw color at it, when you throw like creativity at it, I think it loosens up a bit. Like it kind of tricks the mind into thinking, I'm now doing a coloring book,
Yeah, exactly.
And then you can maybe find some spaciousness, maybe you can find some curiosity, some way of breaking through the stigma and the shame. So just like throw color at it, for sure.
I agree. One of the things I think that my partner and I are going to try next is sexting, because after we had the podcast interview with Miss Shayla, and she was talking about how you can hire someone to sext with, and immediately both Alexis and I were like, "Oh, you can?" Really? And once we realized, we both were like, that would be fun. I was like, to your point, why not try this together first before opening it up to other people? Let's see if we can. And I wonder about it. I wonder if it's gonna make for some fun dialogue.
Oh, let me add to that, actually. Why don't you pretend that one of you has hired the other one to do sexting, and now you're getting the both experience of like, someone new, someone different.
Yes.
And you're getting your sexting on with each other.
Yes, I like it. Maybe we will both create OkCupid profiles and like find each other, and then just start chatting and see what happens.
Yeah. I don't know. There's also like, I like the idea of like a sex work role play that like there's something about like having a pro experience with a pro sexy person. So I don't know, throw it in there. Why not?
Well, we'll take my storytelling skills and put them to work. I like it.
I imagine you're a good sexter. I'd imagine. I'd sext you if I was at the sex thing.
I'm pretty good.
I bet. I would totally sext you if I was at the sex thing for sure.
I can weave myself an interesting tale. Yes, indeed. I will report back. If you all are interested, if you hear us talking about this and you're like, I want to do a chart, you should join Effy in going to the Graphic Sex Project website at graphicsexproject.com. There you can find more information about Jennifer and about the work, and you can make your own graph. You can also find out everything that you need to know on their Instagram page at Graphic Sex Project. And there is a feature that's coming up that Jennifer mentioned in the Journal of Positive Sexuality, where they're going to be analyzing the graphs from the Graphic Sex Project. So I'm excited to read about that and to see all the information that they have learned from the hundreds and hundreds of graphs now that have been submitted over the course of the past few years. And while you are online, you know what I'm going to say. You should join our website. You should go to We Are Curious Foxes. On there, you're going to be able to find articles, and you're going to find links to our podcast episodes and just beautiful art from a number of contributors who allow us to use their gorgeous art to express the work that we're doing. So you should go on there, go onto our Instagram page and Facebook at We Are Curious Foxes. And of course, if you want to support the show and if you want some extras, then you got to get onto Patreon. We Are Curious Foxes. There are over 50 videos from educator-led workshops. There are some behind-the-scenes footage. There's some mini episodes. There's some outtakes between Effy and I and some of our guests. We have something that we're going to be putting up there with Mistress Lucy around anal play and some lessons that she's learned over the years. And so we're going to put that up on Patreon. And so if you want to find that and a lot more, if you want to experience some of the workshops that we have facilitated, then you should go onto Patreon. And we thank you for being a part of this podcast journey with us. Please be sure to subscribe or to follow on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you're listening to. Share a rating, share a comment, share this with somebody else, and share your voice and your story and your question with us. You can do that by emailing us or sending us a voice message at listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com, or you could record a question for the show by calling 201-870-0063.
This episode is produced and edited by Nina Pollock, whose creativity makes talking on this podcast a lot easier. Our intro music is composed by Dave Saha. We are so grateful for their work. And we're grateful to you for listening. As always, stay curious, friends. Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.